Hey guys, Devin Gridley at All Father Fitness, and I finally have a video that's actually educational for once, and it's going to be covering the topic of how hard should you actually train. And this both covers strength and hypertrophy gains, so whichever one you actually look at more, this will cover both of them. And I made this video going off of another video I recently watched that came out, I believe, a day or two ago by Jeff Nippard, and he went and he had an interview with 5 different individuals, high-level individuals, people that are actually doctors and people who are professional athletes in the fitness sport, both a professional IFBB pro bodybuilder and a professional powerlifter and a doctor with her PhD. So I wait and watched this entire video, and every single person gave a lot of information, a lot of very in-depth information, very specific to how they train, how they coach people, how they tell other people to train, and all that. So I wrote down basically the summary of what that person said, and I'll go more in depth about what I remember. And the reason I kind of did that is because what a lot of these people said are things that the average person would not understand. They were talking a lot about things like RPE, RPI, and they were talking about things that most people just wouldn't understand. And even it took me watching it once or twice for some of the people that were talking to really understand what they were talking about. And the main one that explained it in such a way that was kind of difficult to understand was Dr. Mike Israetel. A lot of people know who this person is because he's obviously very influential in the fitness, especially in YouTube. He's all over the place. He's obviously a doctor. He does studies. He coaches people. He trains himself. I believe he trains as a bodybuilder, or he not trains. He actually goes on stage as a bodybuilder, and he also does powerlifting. So yeah, he's obviously very knowledgeable because he's a doctor in the sport, and he also competes in all aspects of the sport. So basically, out of everything that Dr. Mike said was save adaptation throughout your training period. And the way he does his training is it's based on, let's say, I don't know exactly how it is because I haven't been coached by him or whatever, but let's say he has a 6-month period that he's doing a certain type of training and training session. And what he was talking about is instead of going for max adaptation on week 1, why not go for max adaptation on the last week when you've already reached basically your peak adaptation throughout this training period? So let's say 6 months, and at month 1 you're training at 50%, month 2 65, 75, 85, 95, 100, whatever, right? And he does say in it that training hard is obviously going to get you better results, but why train harder when you're able to save this adaptation throughout the training, right? And that's something that he said. And I have a discrepancy with this, and it's because why would you save adaptation throughout this training period when you could get all your adaptation as fast as you possibly can? Now, the biggest thing with this, and anybody who's ever said don't train as hard as you possibly can, their main argument is overtraining and bringing unnecessary stress on your body throughout a week. So the way I train basically push, pull, legs, push, pull, legs. And if my push day, I train so hard that it overlaps into my next push day and it makes it to where I can't lift as much weights or I can't go as hard, then I'm obviously overtraining. But the discrepancy I have with that, and it's true, you shouldn't train so hard that it interferes with your next training day or the next time you hit that muscle, because if you're training that hard, that really is overtraining. And I'm not a person who believes in overtraining unless you train in such a way that it's becoming unhealthy instead of actually healthy for you, because you can't adapt fast enough or it's just bad for you. Like obviously lifting weights for 6 hours every single day as hard as you possibly can isn't going to be good for you. Like that's just kind of common knowledge, right? But what I have a problem with this is no one wants to be patient with it. That's why there's so many scams in the fitness industry saying lose this amount in this amount of time with just this pill, or waist trainers, or creams, or whatever. It's apple cider vinegar, the Sarah's Discovery thing. There's just so many out there. People don't want to wait. They don't want to be patient. And how I look at both strength and hypertrophy training is adaptation, and I'll measure it in adaptation levels instead of actually strength or hypertrophy. So it kind of fits it into one group instead of me having to say this for strength, this for hypertrophy, and instead adaptation, because the way fitness works is it works this way in anything, whether you're lifting for hypertrophy, whether you're lifting for strength, or even if you're running cardio. If you run, let's say today, you're brand new, you've never trained before, you don't have any experience at all. Today, you go in and you run 1 mile. And it's going to be difficult, but let's say you do it. You don't even stop one time, and it's going to suck. It's going to feel like you're dying at the end of it. But 1 week later, you're going to be able to run that mile, and it's going to be easier. And then the next week, it's going to be easier and easier and easier. And that percentage of how much adaptation you get changes based on how many levels you've gone through. So it's going to be more difficult to get from level 8 to 9 than it is to be from level 1 to 2. So if you run a mile today and it's really, really hard, and the next week you run another mile, it's a little bit easier. Maybe it's 25% easier. And then the week after that, it's 30% easier, and then 35%, and that number slowly goes down, right? So you want to, how he said it, save your adaptation throughout your training period. So it basically means work your way up slowly, and eventually you're going to get there, right? And it's true, you will get there eventually, but I do have a problem with that because people don't want to wait that long, and I wouldn't either. I want to be as best as I can possibly be, as fast as I can possibly get there, right? So I don't want to save adaptation throughout my training. I want to train as hard as I possibly can to get the most adaptation in whatever I'm doing, whether it's strength, hypertrophy, or cardio. So for me, I train as hard as I possibly can every single day. And the thought that a lot of these people have, like I said before, is the overtraining. Overtraining will not affect you if you have a good program to where your days don't carry over and will compromise your ability to train effectively. So this is why things are like push, pull, legs, right? On your pushing day, it's not going to involve much things that are on your back. And then when you go into a pull day, it's not going to involve a lot of things on your chest, your triceps, whatever. So basically, let's break it down a little bit easier for you to understand. So Monday for me, chest day. Tuesday for me, back day. Wednesday is leg day, right? None of those have any correlation to one another. If I train chest, I'm training my chest, my shoulders, and my triceps. When I train my back, I'm training my lats for both thickness and width, and then I'm training my biceps. Those are probably the two main things I'm training on those days. Those don't have any correlation to one another. So if I train 100% on Monday, it's not going to affect me on Tuesday because I'm training a different muscle at 100%. Now, this is kind of hard to make your own program like this, and it took me quite a long time to figure out specifically what exercises are going to get me the most bang for my buck without carrying into the next day and making my next training session just really bad. And then also making it to where by the time I hit that muscle group the next time, so on Monday I hit chest, and then on Thursday I hit chest as well. I need to make sure I have enough time to completely heal and adapt so I can train 100% on that day again, right? And fortunately for me, I'm able to adapt really fast and it doesn't affect me. I'm 100% not sore. I can lift the exact same amount of weight. I can sometimes lift even more weight. I remember when I first started deadlifting, my deadlift shot up like crazy. I remember starting at like 220 pounds, and the next week I was at like 250, then 280, then 300, then 315, and then it started slowing down from there. But that's because I wasn't training it as much. I would literally train, I got obsessed, and I would train the deadlift like every 2 days, and I would never overtrain from that. I would just adapt fast enough, and that's fortunate for me. That's not going to account for every single person, right? But I don't believe in saving adaptation throughout your training period. I believe that you should train to get the absolute most adaptation you can in the least amount of time, because then you're going to adapt faster and you're going to get more results that way. So I don't exactly agree with Doc Mike Israetel, but a lot of the information he gave, if you go in and understand what he's saying, and the way Jeff Nippard did it, he had a huge whiteboard and he wrote down everything he was saying, and he made graphs and he did all his thing. That's kind of his shtick, is making graphs and making it more easy for you to understand, because a lot of people, like doctors, are going to say a lot of things that don't make sense to the average Joe Schmo like me and you, right? So he makes it easier to understand, and then I went in, I read it, I looked at it all, and then I made it easier for you to understand. So that was his main point, is to save adaptation throughout your training period, and I don't exactly agree with that. Everything he said is correct and right, and he still agrees that training hard is really important, but you shouldn't train 100% on your first day, right? And I don't agree with that, because 100% on your first day is going to be different than 100% on your 100th day, right? They're going to be completely different. On your first day, you might be able to bench press 100 pounds, but on your 100th day of going 100%, you might be able to bench 200 pounds. You know, that's not accurate at all, probably, but you get the point. So the next person he talked to was John Meadows. John Meadows is an IFBB pro bodybuilder, and he kind of had the same thing as Dr. Mike Israetel, and instead of explaining it in the way that was super hard to understand, he just said there's levels of training. There's basically your beginner, your intermediate, and advanced. And he said that you shouldn't be going to failure or near failure until you're really in that advanced stage. And when you're a beginner, you should just train really, really low intensity and really just focus on your form and getting your strength up. And that's really important. And I completely agree with that, except for the part that you shouldn't train hard. I think even as a beginner, you should train as hard as you can, because like I said, you don't want to save adaptation throughout your training. You don't want to have to wait 5 years before you can actually start training super, super hard. I just don't believe in that. I believe that you should train hard every single day, so the next day you'll be better than you were yesterday. And that was really drilled into my head as a kid. Train hard today, you'll be better tomorrow. And that's just how it works. Today you might be able to go 100% in a week from now. Maybe your 100% will be 110%. The week after that, 120, 130. And eventually your 100% will just keep going up. And that's how you adapt, and that's how you become better at doing what you're doing. So I do agree with the fact that when John Meadows said that you should really focus on form and your strength in your beginning years, I do agree with that 100%. Except focusing on strength when you're a beginner is really difficult, because when you're a beginner, you're obviously not very strong, and even when you're lifting as heavy as you possibly can, which I don't agree with at all. You shouldn't be lifting that heavy, especially as a beginner, because it's very dangerous. But focusing on form is what really, that's what he was mainly focused about, really, is that's what his main message was, is that you should really focus on form in your beginning years, which I 100% agree. Then when you become intermediate, this is when you should start upping your intensity and start doing more things that are more difficult, things like drop sets and supersets. And then when you get to the advanced, this is when you should combine doing things like drop sets and supersets while also going to absolute failure, while also training with your strength. And that's why he wants you to build that strength throughout those first 3 years of training, from beginner to intermediate all the way till you get to advanced, right? So that's what John Meadows said. And Jeff Nippard then talked to a woman named Dr. Steffi Conan, and I actually have seen a bunch of Instagram posts about her lifting a bunch of weight, and I actually never knew who she was until this video, I'll be honest. But she's a 25-time powerlifting champion, so she obviously knows what she's doing in terms of training, and then she's also a doctor. She has her PhD. So she kind of has the best of both worlds, being an actual doctor and a professional athlete. And that's someone I can really relate to, because I'm not a professional athlete nor a doctor, but I like taking the best of both worlds. I like taking practical knowledge from actual training experience and combining it with things like scientific literature. So I looked more at what she said than I would everyone else. I feel like she's more qualified to give information out like that, because she knows the best of both worlds. And hers was really easy to understand. She made it very easy for me, Jeff Nippard, and anyone else to understand. And it was basically work as hard as you possibly can. And her message was, if you want to be the best, you have to train as hard as you can. You have to train harder than you possibly can to be the best, right? And she said, if that's what you want to do, if you want to compete in either bodybuilding or powerlifting, you need to train harder than you ever could, and you just have to train harder. That was her main message. And she said that if that's not your goal, you don't want to do anything competitively, you're just doing this so you can be healthy, completely disregard the fact of training super hard, because that's not the point of it. Training hard is to up your adaptation level enough, and the more you have, the higher at your adaptation level, the more weight you're going to lift, the more muscle you're going to have, and the better you'll be in any competitive sport, right? So that's basically what she said. Just train harder than last time. Famous words of Dr. Greg Doucette, not actually a doctor. But next person that Jeff Nippard talked to was Dr. Eric Helms, and these guys are actually big buddies. They train a lot together. They used to make videos together all the time. And this is where I started having a problem, because I realized that Dr. Mike Israetel and Dr. Eric Helms had videos with Jeff Nippard before explaining that you shouldn't train hard. And this is why I really got into this video, and I kind of wanted to basically go in, and I was in like attack mode. I was in the offense. I wanted to see Dr. Mike Israetel and Dr. Eric Helms to say something wrong and say that you shouldn't train hard, because believe it or not, they actually used to say things like that until someone, cough cough, Dr. Greg Doucette came in and basically bullshitted everyone. She called out all the bullshit. And it wasn't that they were saying don't train hard. It was things they were trying to say volume is more important than intensity, and now they're completely flopped on that. And now they say Dr. Eric Helms actually said that it depends on the person whether you are stimulated more by volume or stimulated more by intensity, but they're both exactly the same. And that's basically what he said. He said if you look on it at a graph, they're both going to interconnect, they're going to hit each other, or they're both going to dip at the same time, and they're going to be almost exactly the same. So if you train at 50% for 2 hours, it's the same thing as training 100% for 1 hour, right? And that's technically true. You get more volume, less intensity, more intensity, less volume. But the way I train, I actually intercombine those. I train for 2 hours, and I train 100%. So there's a big fuck you to all that. But they used to go through things like full body training, and since they would train every other day, they'd go Monday full body, rest the next day, Wednesday full body, rest, and then Friday another full body day. And there was a lot of discrepancy about this because they're not training hard at all. You can't train that hard. No one can adapt that fast. And even I've tried it, and I don't even have the adaptability to go and do that. And so it's obviously, but you do get 3 training days for all your muscles instead of just 2. So technically, the argument was that this was the same as doing a push-pull legs. But the problem with it is you can't train 100% on that, while doing a push-pull legs you can. So in my opinion, push-pull legs is definitely better, but we're not going to get into that. The main thing he said was that an RPE of 8 or higher leads to the most adaptation, and that's what we're going for. We're going for the most adaptation. So he admitted that going near failure or just going hard is going to lead them to the most adaptation, which leads to the most hypertrophy or the most strength gains. And for people that don't know what an RPE is, it's reps. It's not reps in reserve. It's that's kind of what it means. There's different levels. There's level 1 through 10. 10 being the absolute max you can lift. That means you cannot get another rep in. So if you have 10 reps and at, I don't know, let's say just 100 pounds makes it pretty easy. 10 reps at 100 pounds, and that's your absolute max. You couldn't get one more rep. You're at RPE 10. And then you get, if you're at 9 reps for 100 pounds, you're RPE 9, and so on like that. And there's different percentages and different weights, and it's a whole thing. And that's why I went in and I kind of summarized what they said, because they're talking about things like RPE, RPI, and all that good stuff. A lot of things people don't understand, and is just unnecessary. And they only talk like that because their doctors don't know why, because obviously not every single person is going to be able to understand that. But that's whatever. Next person he talked to was a person named Dr. Knuckles. He was published in some big fitness magazine. I think it's called Muscle something. Not Doctor Jeff Nippard buys it every month or whatever and reads through it, and that's how he makes a lot of his videos. But the biggest thing Dr. Nichols said that I saw is that near failure is the best for hypertrophy. So that basically admits that training harder is going to lead to the most adaptation, leading to the most hypertrophy and strength gains. The difference between hypertrophy and strength that I think I should kind of go over is that, and Dr. Nichols actually covered this, he broke it into two groups, intensity and volume. Intensity is going to lead to better hypertrophy, while volume is going to lead to better strength, which I 100% agree with. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't train 100%. So if you train 50% with more volume and 100% at your max intensity, they're going to be the same, and I don't believe that. Just because your volume is double doesn't mean you're going to get a high enough adaptation level, right? So, and you kind of have to think about that. If you're training 50% for 2 hours, it's not going to equal the same thing as training 100% for 1 hour. And people really need to start understanding that, because 50% isn't going to get you it's not going to make you adapt. You're going to be very easily accustomed to doing 50%. It's not going to get you any adaptation at all. While if you're going 100%, you have to adapt, because your body needs to be able to survive going 100% every single day, right? You're going to need that adaptation. So I feel as though you get more adaptation through intensity than you do actually volume. And I feel as though all 5 of those people agree with that, and they're finally starting to understand that, because like I said before, they did not agree with that, and they were saying the opposite, really, that volume was more important than intensity. And now they flip-flopped. Who knows why, but they're getting it right now, so that's what's important. And the main takeaway from this, if you didn't really understand any of that at all, was that training harder is the best way to get the most gains. If you want more muscle, train harder. You want better strength, train harder. If you want to be the best in the world, you're going to have to train harder. If you're just doing this for health, you're not doing it for any other reason than that, you don't need to train hard. You don't really need to do anything at all. You just run a mile every day. You do your compound movements, and even that is over what you need to do to be healthy, in my opinion. But if you want anything out of your training, you don't have to train to be competitive. I don't train to be competitive in bodybuilding or powerlifting. I just train because I love to train. I could not live without being able to go to the gym or being able to go on a run or anything like that. It's just, I grew up with it. I couldn't be without it. So I have to do that, and it's just been drilled in my head since I was a kid to go 100% as much as you possibly can. So that's just how I grew up, and I wish a lot more people grew up like that, because a lot of people's lives would be better off, and they just understand a lot of things more. And the world would be a better place, and I'm sure we can all agree on that one. But that's really all I got for this. I hope you learned something from it, and I know it didn't have a lot of scientific information, and I try to limit the scientific information because not a lot of people understand it. But if you do want more scientific information, you want more graphs, you want more explanation of things, please let me know down in the comments. I'd love to start doing that, because I love reading it. Obviously, I would love talking about it and teaching it to you so you could better understand it. But because if I was able to explain this all 100% accurately with as much information that I possibly could, there was no doubt that you'd learn something, right? But since I had to summarize it, maybe you weren't able to learn as well, if at all. And I want people to be able to learn. That's the main point of my channel. I want people to see the mistakes that either I make or other people make, and make sure they don't make the same mistake. And they just have a constant, if you have a graph of a person's training life, most people it's always gonna go up, but it's gonna drop down and up for every mistake that you make, right? But if I'm able to limit how many downs you have and you just go in a straight line up, that'd be amazing, right? And I want to change people's lives to be able to do that. I want them to be as healthy as they possibly can. I want them to reach their goals, whether it's hypertrophy, being a good bodybuilder, or strength gains. You want to be the best power lifter. That's my goal. I want to set people on the right path to go and do that. And that is my job. I take it as a job. That's why I make these videos. So if you did learn something from it, please comment down below. I'd love to hear that I actually informed you about something. But if you'd like to see more scientific knowledge, you'd like to see more data, you like to see studies, things like that, please let me know. I'd love to do that for you. And that's all I got for this one, and I'll see you in the next one.